Chester William Nimitz was an American naval legend whose quiet competence and strategic brilliance helped win the Pacific War. Born in Fredericksburg, Texas on February 24, 1885, he came from German immigrant stock in the heart of the Texas Hill Country. He would rise from these humble origins to command the largest naval force ever assembled and to become one of the most respected military leaders in American history. Nimitz's early life was marked by absence and loss. His father, Chester Bernard Nimitz Sr., died before young Chester was born. The boy would grow up never knowing his father, a loss that shaped his character in subtle ways. His mother, Anna Henk Nimitz, remarried when Chester was young to William Nimitz, his father's brother. His stepfather and grandfather became the male influences in his life. Young Chester grew up in Fredericksburg, a small German community in central Texas. The town had been founded by German immigrants in the 1840s, and German was still widely spoken when Nimitz was a boy. He grew up bilingual, speaking both German and English, and absorbed the German values of discipline, hard work, and thoroughness that characterized the community. His grandfather, Charles Henry Nimitz, was the dominant figure of his childhood. The elder Nimitz had been a merchant seaman in his youth and regaled young Chester with stories of the sea. Ran the Nimitz Hotel in Fredericksburg, a successful establishment that served travelers and locals alike. The hotel was built in the shape of a steamboat, reflecting the old man's love of maritime life. Chester worked in the hotel as a boy, learning the value of hard work and customer service. Fredericksburg was a small town and opportunities were limited for an ambitious young man. Chester was a good student, intelligent and hardworking, but his family lacked the money to send him to college. He considered various careers, including the military, which offered education and advancement to those without wealth or connections. When Chester was 16, he applied to the United States Military Academy at West Point. He took the competitive examination but failed to receive an appointment. Disappointed but not defeated, he learned that his congressman had an opening for the Naval Academy at Annapolis. Chester applied, took the examination, and this time was successful. In 1901, at age 16, Chester Nimitz left Texas for Annapolis, Maryland, to begin his naval career. The Naval Academy was a rigorous institution that demanded academic excellence, physical fitness, and military discipline. Nimitz proved to be a capable midshipman. He was not the top student in his class, but he was solid and reliable. He excelled in mathematics and showed an aptitude for navigation and seamanship. He was popular with his classmates, known for his easygoing manner and quiet confidence. He avoided the demerits and disciplinary problems that plagued some midshipmen. He graduated in 1905, seventh in a class of 114 midshipmen. It was a respectable showing that marked him as a competent officer with potential. After graduation, Nimitz faced the mandatory 2 years of sea duty before he could be commissioned as an ensign. This was standard practice at the time, a probationary period to weed out those unsuited for naval service. He was assigned to the battleship Ohio, part of the Asiatic Fleet. The assignment took him to the Far East, where he got his first real taste of naval life and international politics. He served competently and was commissioned as an ensign in January 1907. Nimitz's early career was varied and educational. He served on several ships, learning different aspects of naval operations. In 1907, he was given his first command, the destroyer Decatur. He was just 22 years old, young for such responsibility, but the Navy believed in giving junior officers early command experience. The assignment nearly ended his career before it truly began. In July 1908, while Nimitz was commanding the Decatur, he ran the ship aground in the Philippines. The grounding was due to navigational error, and Nimitz was entirely responsible. He was court-martialed, found guilty of hazarding his ship, and received a letter of reprimand. It was a humiliating experience that could have derailed his career. Many officers never recovered from such early failures, but Nimitz learned from the experience rather than being destroyed by it. He became obsessed with navigation and seamanship, determined never to make such an error again. The court-martial taught him humility and the importance of thoroughness and preparation. In later years, he would say that the grounding was one of the most valuable experiences of his career because it taught him lessons he never forgot. The Navy, for its part, did not hold the incident against him permanently. His superiors recognized that he had learned from his mistake and that he possessed qualities worth developing. In 1909, Nimitz was assigned to submarine duty, a new and somewhat experimental branch of the Navy. Submarines were primitive vessels in the early 20th century, dangerous and uncomfortable, but they represented the future of naval warfare. Nimitz took to submarine duty with enthusiasm. He commanded several submarines and became an expert in submarine operations and diesel engine technology. He studied everything about submarines, from their tactical employment to their mechanical systems. He became a qualified submarine commander and one of the Navy's leading experts on undersea warfare. Nimitz's submarine experience gave him insights that would prove invaluable decades later. He understood the capabilities and limitations of submarines. He knew how they could be used effectively and what their vulnerabilities were. This knowledge would shape his strategic thinking during World War II, when submarines became one of America's most effective weapons against Japan. In 1912, Nimitz was assigned to the diesel engine shop at the New York Navy Yard. It was unglamorous duty, but he threw himself into it with characteristic thoroughness. He became an expert on diesel engines, studying their design and operation. He even traveled to Germany and Belgium to study diesel technology at the leading manufacturers. This technical expertise set him apart from many naval officers who focused solely on tactics and strategy. Nimitz married Catherine Vance Freeman in 1913. It was a happy marriage that would last until his death more than 50 years later. Catherine, known as Kate, was a gracious and intelligent woman who provided stability and support throughout Nimitz's career. They had 4 children: Catherine, Chester Jr., Anna, and Mary. Nimitz was a devoted family man who maintained close relationships with his wife and children despite the demands of his naval career. He was a gentle father, quite different from the stern disciplinarian that many military men became at home. When World War I erupted in Europe in 1914, Nimitz followed events closely. The war demonstrated the importance of submarines in modern naval warfare. German U-boats nearly brought Britain to its knees through unrestricted submarine warfare. Nimitz studied these campaigns carefully, learning lessons about submarine tactics and anti-submarine warfare that would serve him later. When the United States entered the war in 1917, Nimitz hoped for combat duty. Instead, he was assigned to the staff of the commander of the submarine force, Atlantic Fleet. It was important work, helping to organize and train the submarine forces that would operate against Germany, but it was not the combat command he desired. He served competently in this role, applying his technical expertise and organizational skills to building an effective submarine force. After the war, Nimitz continued to rise through the naval ranks. He attended the Naval War College in 1922 and 1923, where he studied strategy, tactics, and naval history. The War College exposed him to the thinking of Alfred Thayer Mahan and other naval theorists. He studied the great naval campaigns of history and developed his own ideas about naval warfare. He was particularly interested in the role of logistics and supply in naval operations, understanding that modern fleets required massive support systems to operate effectively. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Nimitz held various commands and staff positions. He commanded cruisers and battleships, served on staffs, and continued to build his reputation as a competent and reliable officer. He was known for his calm demeanor, his thorough preparation, and his ability to get along with difficult personalities. He avoided the political infighting that characterized some officers' careers, focusing instead on doing his job well. In 1938, Nimitz was promoted to Rear Admiral and given command of Cruiser Division II. He was now a flag officer, part of the Navy's senior leadership. He had come a long way from the boy in Fredericksburg who had never known his father. He was 53 years old, and his career seemed to be winding down toward a comfortable retirement. Then came December 7, 1941. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything. The surprise attack devastated the Pacific Fleet, sinking or damaging 8 battleships and killing more than 2,000 Americans. It was the worst naval defeat in American history, and it demanded immediate action. Admiral Husband Kimmel, who had commanded the Pacific Fleet, was relieved. The Navy needed a new commander, someone who could rebuild the shattered fleet and take the war to Japan. 10 days after Pearl Harbor, Nimitz received orders to assume command of the Pacific Fleet. It was a daunting assignment. The fleet was in ruins, morale was shattered, and the Japanese were advancing across the Pacific seemingly unstoppable. Many officers would have hesitated to accept such responsibility. Nimitz accepted without complaint. He arrived at Pearl Harbor on Christmas Day 1941 and took command of the Pacific Fleet on December 31st, the last day of the worst year in American naval history. Nimitz faced enormous challenges. The battleship force, the backbone of the pre-war Navy, was largely destroyed. The Japanese had air and naval superiority across most of the Pacific. American forces were retreating in the Philippines, Wake Island, and Guam. The situation seemed hopeless. But Nimitz brought to the task certain qualities that would prove decisive. He was calm under pressure, able to think clearly when others panicked. He was a good judge of character and knew how to select subordinates and trust them to do their jobs. He understood logistics and knew that the war would be won by the side that could sustain its forces over vast oceanic distances. One of Nimitz's first decisions was to retain the staff officers who had served under Kimmel. Many expected a wholesale purge, but Nimitz recognized that these officers knew the situation and had learned hard lessons from the Pearl Harbor attack. He told them that the disaster was not their fault and that he needed their experience and expertise. This decision boosted morale and prevented the disruption that would have come from replacing the entire staff. Nimitz also recognized that aircraft carriers, not battleships, would be the decisive weapons of the Pacific War. The Japanese had demonstrated this at Pearl Harbor. Fortunately, the American carriers had been at sea during the attack and had survived. Nimitz built his strategy around these carriers, using them aggressively to strike back at the Japanese. In the early months of 1942, Nimitz ordered carrier raids against Japanese-held islands. These were pinprick attacks that did little real damage, but they boosted American morale and worried the Japanese. They showed that America was still in the fight. The most dramatic of these raids came in April 1942, when 16 Army bombers commanded by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle launched from the carrier Hornet and bombed Tokyo. The raid did minimal physical damage but had enormous psychological impact. It showed the Japanese that their homeland was vulnerable and forced them to keep forces home for defense. The first major test came in May 1942 at the Battle of the Coral Sea. Japanese forces were advancing toward Port Moresby in New Guinea, threatening Australia. Nimitz sent 2 carriers to intercept. The resulting battle was the first naval engagement in history where the opposing ships never saw each other. All the fighting was done by aircraft. The battle was tactically inconclusive, with both sides losing 1 carrier, but strategically it was an American victory. The Japanese advance was stopped and Port Moresby was saved. The decisive battle came a month later. American codebreakers had learned that the Japanese were planning a major operation against Midway Island in early June. Nimitz had to decide whether to trust the intelligence and commit his limited forces based on it. Many officers were skeptical, but Nimitz trusted his intelligence staff. He positioned his 3 available carriers northeast of Midway and waited for the Japanese. The gamble paid off spectacularly. On June 4, 1942, American dive bombers caught the Japanese carriers with their decks full of armed and fueled aircraft. In 5 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were fatally damaged. A 4th was sunk later in the day. The Japanese lost 4 carriers and many of their best pilots. It was a devastating defeat from which they never recovered. Midway was the turning point of the Pacific War. Nimitz's decision to trust his intelligence and commit his forces based on it had won one of the most decisive naval victories in history. The battle demonstrated his willingness to take calculated risks and his ability to remain calm under enormous pressure. After Midway, the strategic initiative passed to the Americans. Nimitz could now plan offensive operations rather than simply reacting to Japanese moves. In August 1942, American forces landed on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, beginning a brutal 6-month campaign. Nimitz supported the operation with his carriers and surface forces. The naval battles around Guadalcanal were vicious, with both sides losing heavily, but Nimitz understood that America's industrial capacity meant he could replace losses while Japan could not. He was willing to trade ships and planes, knowing that time favored the United States. Nimitz's strategy for the Pacific War was shaped by geography and logistics. The Pacific was vast, with distances measured in thousands of miles. No fleet could operate effectively without bases for supply and repair. Nimitz developed a strategy of island hopping, capturing key islands that could serve as bases while bypassing and isolating Japanese strongpoints. This strategy saved lives by avoiding unnecessary battles and kept the advance moving toward Japan. He worked closely with General Douglas MacArthur, who commanded Army forces in the Southwest Pacific. The relationship was sometimes difficult. MacArthur was vain and political, demanding resources and publicity. Nimitz was modest and focused on results rather than glory, but Nimitz managed the relationship skillfully, coordinating operations while avoiding public disputes. As the war progressed, Nimitz's force grew enormously. By 1944, he commanded hundreds of ships, thousands of aircraft, and millions of men. The Pacific Fleet became the largest naval force ever assembled. Nimitz managed this vast organization with calm efficiency. He delegated authority to subordinate commanders, trusting them to execute his strategic vision. He selected aggressive, competent officers like Raymond Spruance and William Halsey to command his carrier task forces. In November 1943, Nimitz was promoted to Fleet Admiral, a 5-star rank created specifically for the war's senior commanders. He was now equal in rank to MacArthur and to the overall commander in Europe, Dwight Eisenhower. The promotion recognized his contributions to the war effort and his position as one of America's most important military leaders. The campaigns of 1944 and 1945 saw American forces advancing relentlessly across the Pacific. The Marianas were captured in mid-1944, providing bases for B-29 bombers to strike Japan. The Philippines were liberated in a massive campaign that saw the largest naval battle in history at Leyte Gulf. Iwo Jima and Okinawa were taken in brutal battles that brought American forces to Japan's doorstep. Throughout these campaigns, Nimitz remained at his headquarters at Pearl Harbor, managing the overall strategy while his subordinates commanded the tactical operations. He visited the front regularly, inspecting facilities and talking with troops, but he understood that his job was strategic direction, not tactical command. Nimitz's leadership style was very different from MacArthur's theatrical approach or George Patton's aggressive personality. Nimitz was quiet, modest, and unassuming. He listened more than he talked. He He made decisions carefully after consulting with his staff and subordinates. He never raised his voice or lost his temper. He treated everyone with courtesy and respect, from admirals to enlisted men. This leadership style earned him deep loyalty and respect. Officers who served under Nimitz admired his competence and appreciated his trust in them. He created an atmosphere where subordinates felt empowered to take initiative and make decisions. This was crucial in the Pacific, where distances and communication delays meant that local commandos often had to act without guidance from headquarters. By the summer of 1945, Japan was defeated but refused to surrender. Nimitz was preparing for Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese home islands. The operation would have been the largest amphibious assault in history, and casualties were expected to be enormous. Then in August, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on August 15th. The war was over. On September 2, 1945, Nimitz was present at Tokyo Bay for the formal surrender ceremony aboard the battleship Missouri. He signed the surrender document on behalf of the United States, representing the Navy that had defeated Japan. It was the culmination of nearly 4 years of brutal warfare across the vast Pacific. After the war, Nimitz was appointed Chief of Naval Operations, the Navy's highest position. He served in this role from 1945 to 1947, overseeing the massive demobilization of the wartime Navy and helping to shape the post-war naval establishment. He advocated for maintaining a strong Navy and for developing new technologies, including nuclear power for ships. He retired from active duty in 1947 at age 62. He had served in the Navy for 46 years, rising from midshipman to fleet admiral. His retirement was marked by tributes and honors from around the world. He was universally recognized as one of the great naval commanders in history. Nimitz's retirement years were active and productive. He served as a regent of the University of California and worked with various organizations. He avoided partisan politics and declined offers to run for office, though both political parties approached him. He traveled, gave speeches, and spent time with his family. He maintained his dignity and modesty, refusing to capitalize on his fame for personal profit. In 1961, Nimitz suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. He faced this final challenge with the same quiet courage he had shown throughout his life. He continued to live quietly, cared for by his devoted wife Kate. His mind remained sharp even as his body failed. Chester Nimitz died on February 20, 1966, 4 days before his 81st birthday. He died at his home on Yerba Buena Island in San Francisco Bay, surrounded by his family. The cause was complications from pneumonia and the effects of his stroke. His death was mourned across America and around the world. He was buried with full military honors at Golden Gate National Cemetery in San Bruno, California. His funeral was attended by thousands, including military leaders, government officials, and ordinary citizens who remembered his service. Nimitz's legacy is that of a great military leader who combined strategic brilliance with personal humility. He commanded the largest naval force in history and defeated a determined enemy across the vast Pacific. He did this without seeking personal glory or engaging in the political maneuvering that characterized some military leaders. His strategic decisions at Midway and throughout the Pacific War demonstrated sound judgment and calculated risk-taking. His leadership style showed that effectiveness comes from competence and character, not from theatrical gestures or self-promotion. Modern historians rank Nimitz among the greatest admirals in naval history, alongside Nelson, Togo, and other legendary commanders. His conduct of the Pacific War is studied in military academies around the world as a model of strategic planning and operational execution. The nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Nimitz, commissioned in 1975, bears his name and serves as a floating tribute to his legacy. Nimitz represented certain American values that transcended his military achievements. He rose from modest origins through merit and hard work. He faced setbacks, including the early court-martial, and learned from them rather than being defeated by them. He remained modest despite enormous success and power. He treated others with respect and dignity regardless of their rank or position. Perhaps most importantly, Nimitz demonstrated that leadership is not about personal aggrandizement, but about accomplishing the mission and taking care of those under your command. He never sought publicity or credit. He gave credit to his subordinates and took responsibility for failures. He made difficult decisions without agonizing or second-guessing himself. He remained calm when others panicked and provided steady leadership during America's darkest hours. In his personal life, Nimitz was devoted to his family and maintained lifelong friendships. He enjoyed simple pleasures like gardening and horseshoes. He read widely and maintained intellectual curiosity throughout his life. He was a complete person, not just a military automaton. The contrast between Nimitz and some other World War II leaders is instructive. Where MacArthur was vain and political, Nimitz was modest and professional. Where Patton was theatrical and profane, Nimitz was quiet and courteous. Yet Nimitz was equally effective and perhaps more respected by those who served under him. His example showed that there are different paths to effective leadership. Nimitz's story is also a reminder of the importance of technical expertise and continuous learning. His early experience with submarines and diesel engines gave him knowledge that proved valuable decades later. His study of naval history and strategy at the War College shaped his thinking about how to fight the Pacific War. He never stopped learning and adapting. In the end, Chester Nimitz was a man who did his duty without fanfare or complaint. He accepted enormous responsibility and discharged it with competence and integrity. He won one of history's great military victories and then stepped aside gracefully when his work was done. He lived a life of service, achievement, and quiet dignity. His legacy endures not just in the battles he won, but in the example he set of how a leader should conduct himself. He proved that greatness comes not from self-promotion, but from competence, character, and dedication to something larger than oneself. Chester Nimitz remains an authentic American hero, a man whose life exemplified the best qualities of military leadership and personal character.